Hello, welcome to episode 5 in our series Learning to Forgive. If you haven't yet subscribed to my channel, 3John2, please go ahead and subscribe, like, comment, and share these videos with your friends and relatives and people you care about. I suppose that you have been blessed and that is why you're listening to this episode. If you have missed any of the previous episodes, please go back and listen to them. Each episode follows what we have said earlier. It would be good if you start from the beginning. Now, I would like to call this episode a blast from the past. We're going way back into the book of Genesis in the Bible, which is the very first book. Genesis talks about the creation of the world, how God created the world and how God created mankind. Adam and Eve were created in God's image. They were supposed to live eternally. Their bodies were not supposed to get old or decay. But when mankind chose to disobey God, sin came into the human race, and as a result of sin, sickness, decay, human relationship conflict, ecological problems, and all the other kind of problems happened as a result of man's disobedience, and man's disobedience is called sin in the Bible. However, God had promised in the book of Genesis that He would provide a way for mankind to be redeemed, that his sin would be forgiven in the future, and it would come in the form of Christ eventually. That's just a big overview of what the book of Genesis is about, but I would like to focus way down to one family in the book of Genesis, and it's the family of Jacob. Now, Jacob was the son of Isaac, who was the son of Abraham, and Abraham was a person that God had chosen to start a Hebraic or Hebrew race, from whom Christ would eventually be born, the Messiah, who would be the Savior of the world. Abraham has a son called Isaac. Isaac has a son called Jacob. And Jacob has 12 sons, and one of them is called Joseph. And I would like to talk to you about Joseph today. Joseph was the second youngest child of Jacob. After Joseph was born, there was another child that was born to Jacob. His name was Benjamin. And Benjamin was Joseph's little brother, or the youngest in the family. Now, Joseph was unique in the sense that he had a special call on his life. He had received dreams from God about his future. And in those dreams, he was told that he was going to be someone so great that even his older brothers and his parents would acknowledge him, and he would be above them. Now, Joseph was a teenager at the time when he had the dreams, and he shared the dreams with his brothers, and his brothers obviously got jealous. They were also jealous of Joseph for another reason. His father loved him so much that Joseph was given a special treatment. His father made him a coat of many colors, which his brothers didn't have. Joseph's brothers saw the partiality that was being practiced in the family, how Jacob, the father, was showing so much favor to Joseph and not to them. And then on top of that, Joseph would come back and tattletale on his brothers to his father. However, these dreams that Joseph saw and the special treatment that he would get from his father caused Joseph's brothers to hate him increasingly. There came a time when Jacob sent Joseph to go find out how they were doing and to bring back report. So Joseph left his hometown and went around to look for his brothers. Eventually, Joseph found him in a town not too far from Shechem. When the brothers saw Joseph come towards them, they recognized the coat of many colors that their father had gifted him, and they conspired against him, and they thought of killing him. And they said to each other, let's kill him and find out what would happen to his dreams. They tore the coat off him and threw him into a pit. And then later on, they saw a caravan of Ishmaelites carrying merchandise down to Egypt. So they had an idea. Instead of letting Joseph die in a dry well all by himself, why not pull him out of the well, sell him to the Ishmaelites so that they could get some money. So this is back in those days where slavery was still practiced. So they pulled Joseph out and sold Joseph as a slave to the Ishmaelites. The Ishmaelites took Joseph down to Egypt. Joseph ended up being a slave to Potiphar, who was an officer in the court of Pharaoh. Now, the brothers took Joseph's coat of many colors, tore into pieces, and dipped the coat in the blood of the lamb, brought it back to their dad, pretending that they had found that coat somewhere in the wilderness. With the condition of the coat the way it was and the blood stain that was on it, Jacob surmised that Joseph had been killed by a wild animal. He mourned for many, many days, and from that time onwards, Jacob's health basically went downhill. Back to Joseph, he is now a slave in Potiphar's house, but the Bible says that God was with Joseph. So everything that Joseph did, God prospered. When Potiphar saw that everything that Joseph put his hands to, God would bless, he started promoting Joseph until Joseph became the manager of his estate. Potiphar left everything in Joseph's hand. He didn't do any accounting because he trusted Joseph. Joseph had become by now handsome, tall, muscular looking, and he started to attract his master's wife's attention. She tried to seduce Joseph multiple times, but Joseph would always decline. One day Joseph said to her, "Look, I cannot do this because to do this would be sinning against my master who trusts me with everything and put everything in my hand except for you because you are his wife. And to do so also would be me sinning against God, which I cannot." So Joseph had the fear of God, and he was able to keep himself pure. Unfortunately, one day Joseph went into the house to do the work, but none of the servants was there except for him. And Potiphar's wife came again on Joseph and said, "Come and sleep with me right now." And Joseph would not, and he ran away from the house, but she grabbed his coat, so he left his coat behind. Now Potiphar's wife started feeling disgusted with Joseph because she had tried so many times, so she was going to make Joseph pay for refusing to sleep with her. So she concocted a story. By the time her husband came home for dinner in the evening, she lied to her husband and said, "Look, Joseph came in to rape me, but I cried out, and then he left his coat and ran out." Now, Potiphar did not check the story with Joseph. He got really upset and angry and put Joseph in the dungeon along with the political prisoners who were there. So Joseph went into that prison. After a while, the warden of the prison started to notice that Joseph was a very reliable person. Everything he did, God was with him and God prospered it. So the warden put Joseph in charge of prison. So he was in charge of all the prisoners now. So Joseph got promoted, but he was still a prisoner. And then one day, the chief butler and the chief baker of Pharaoh, who were imprisoned because they had offended Pharaoh somehow, and they were awaiting sentences. One night, both of them dreamed dreams, and Joseph interpreted their dreams for them because Joseph said interpretation belonged to God. And accordingly, the chief baker was hanged 3 days, and in 3 days, the chief butler was restored to his original position. And the chief butler forgot all about Joseph until 2 years later. After 2 years, Pharaoh dreamed 2 dreams, and he could not find anyone to interpret those dreams. Then the chief butler remembered that there was a Hebrew boy called Joseph who was left in prison, and Joseph had helped him to interpret his dreams, and that's how he got back his position as a chief butler to the Pharaoh. So he told Pharaoh about Joseph. So Joseph was called out of prison. He showered and shaved and changed into nice clothes and appeared before Pharaoh, and Pharaoh shared the dreams with him. And then Joseph interpreted the dreams and told Pharaoh that God was about to bring 7 years of prosperity followed by 7 years of famine. And he advised Pharaoh to build storehouses and store 20% of the grains in those 7 years so that when famine came, they would have food for the years of famine. What Joseph gave to Pharaoh really pleased Pharaoh and his officers very much. So Pharaoh decided that since Joseph was the one that God told what, what was going to happen in Egypt soon, and since Joseph was the one who also provided a solution for the famine, why not put him in charge of this project? So Joseph was immediately promoted to be the second highest person in the whole kingdom of Egypt. So he became instantly the prime minister, if you would like to call him, of Egypt, just next to the king. And then he got married and he had children. But remember, he is still in Egypt and he had not met his father or his brothers all these years. So 7 years of plenty came. Joseph stored lots of grains in the cities, in warehouses. And then the 7 years of famine came. The first 2 years came, and then Jacob ran out of food in Canaan. So Jacob heard that there was food in Egypt, so he told his sons to go to Egypt to buy food. So all the sons of Jacob, except for Joseph, who was supposed to have died, according to their story, and Benjamin, who was the youngest son, stayed back with their father. So the 10 older sons of Jacob, they go down to Egypt to buy food, and everybody who came from overseas to buy food had to go to Joseph. So obviously these 10 brothers came to Joseph. Now Joseph dressed up as an Egyptian. Maybe about 22 years have passed since they saw Joseph last, so they didn't really recognize Joseph. Now Joseph was a mature man. He was speaking Egyptian. He was dressed Egyptian. He was behaving like Egyptian, so they had no idea that this man with whom they were talking about buying food was actually their brother that they had sold into Egypt. So Joseph has suffered a lot, right? In Potiphar's house, in the dungeon. Now he's enjoying a really good time in the palace. He was a powerful man, but he was still not with his family. And he remembered his dad so much. So Joseph pretended not to know anything. He pretended not to know anything about these 10 brothers and their family. So he asked questions like he was conducting a general inquiry and said, okay, you said you have a dad. How old is he? And is he well? Is he healthy and all that? Do you have any other brother? And they said, yes, we have one youngest and he is with his dad, and we have one that's older than him that died long time ago. And Joseph is listening to all the story and says, okay, you actually think that I have died. Anyway, he did not reveal who he was, so he provided them with food, and they went back to Egypt, and everybody found that the sack of grain, the money that they had taken to Egypt was in their sack. So they were scared that somehow the money that was supposed to have been paid for the grain had been restored to them. They were wondering what was happening. And then they had finished all that food. Jacob said, go again, buy some more food from Egypt. And they said, no, we can't go unless Benjamin goes with us. And why did you tell them that Benjamin is still there? Well, he asked questions pointedly, and we had to tell him. Jacob said, then if you have to take Benjamin, but take some gifts from here and take double the money you took last time and go get us some more food. 10 brothers plus Benjamin. They all go to Joseph again to buy grain, and Joseph this time said, let's bring them to my house and provide them with food. The brothers were surprised that so much was known about them, that they actually got seating according to their age. And then Benjamin got 5 times the amount of food all the other brothers had. So Benjamin was being showed favoritism again. The next day, they loaded up the sack. Again, Joseph commanded that everybody's money should be put in the mouth of their sack, and his silver cup should be put in the sack that belonged to Benjamin. The brothers didn't know anything. They started traveling back, and then I did say 10 brothers plus Benjamin. Actually, Simeon was retained in Egypt, so 9 brothers plus Benjamin went to Egypt. Joseph sent them off. They hardly out of town, Joseph sent a servant and said, "Go, chase them, and tell them, why did you steal my master's silver cup?" Obviously, this was a setup. Joseph had done it so that somehow he would help his brothers realize their sin against him. So Joseph had all the authority. He could have revealed himself any time. He would have got them tortured and killed and whatnot, but he had not done any of that yet. Would he do it? Let's find out. The chief steward of Joseph's house goes and pursues them, finds them just right out of town, stops them and say, "Why are you so bad with my master? My master's been so good to you. He treated you well. He gave you food. He took care of your animals, and he sold you food at fair price and all that. Why did you have to steal my master's cup?" He says, "No. Why would we do that? We didn't steal your master's cup. With whom you find your master's cup, let that person be killed, and we are your master's slaves." So they spoke too quick. The servant started checking the sack of each of the brothers, and then came to Benjamin's sack last and found the cup there. And they all tore their clothes and said, "We are all damned. We are all doomed." So they all packed up and they all went back to Joseph's house. And Joseph said, "Why did you have to steal my cup?" And of course, it was a setup. They didn't know. And they started speaking through the interpreter because they thought that Joseph was an Egyptian. "Sir, we are all guilty before God. We all are your slaves. We are all your slaves." And Joseph said, "No. Only the person with whom the silver cup was found, he'll be my slave. The rest of you go back to your father." No. We cannot do that because our father said that that Benjamin had to come back. Judah said, "Let me stay back. Let me be your Lord's slave instead of Benjamin, because I have given guarantee to my father that I would bring Benjamin back safe and sound. And if Benjamin did not come back, my father would die in grief." So as Judah started to beg Joseph to keep him instead of Benjamin and send Benjamin back because he became a guarantor for his brother's life, and knowing that if Benjamin didn't go back, that Jacob would die with grief, Joseph was no longer able to contain his emotions. So he commanded everyone to leave, and he revealed himself as Joseph. He started talking to them in the Hebrew tongue, and they were all shocked that it was Joseph. They all could not absorb the fact that the little brother that they so much hated had now become such a powerful person in Egypt, and that they in fact were bowing before Joseph, just like Joseph had seen in the dream. So they were shocked and they were scared as well at the same time, and Joseph immediately calmed their fear, saying that, "No, don't be angry at yourself. Yes, you hated me, you sold me into Egypt, but God actually sent me here so that he could save so many lives as it is this day." So Joseph had realized by then that it was God's plan for him to be in Egypt, and God had used Joseph's immaturity and his brother's hatred towards him to be instruments through which Joseph was taken away from home and put into Egypt. Yes, Joseph went through a very, very difficult time. It had been 22 years since he saw his dad. In those 22 years, 13 years, he was a slave in Potiphar's house, or he was in the dungeon. So he had suffered for good 13 years. And then the past 9 years had been great, but it did not erase the pain of the first 13 years. So I'm sure that Joseph had had time in the years that he was serving Pharaoh as the prime minister of Egypt and taking care of the food project, that he had time to reflect on the things that had happened to him in the past. How he was with his father's brothers, he was in the tent with his dad, he had those dreams, he had the favor and the love and all the privileges that he had with his dad. But he had time to reflect on those dreams, and now that he's in Egypt, he has become a a very powerful person in Egypt. He must have realized by then that those circumstances that were part of his life, many of which were not really pleasant, especially from the year 17 till year 30, when he was serving Potiphar as a slave and also when he was in the dungeon. Things were not really nice in his life. He looked back and he had a chance to reflect on how God had actually redeemed those hard years of his life and made him into a man that was now able to serve Pharaoh as a second highest ranking person in the whole nation of Egypt. So now he's in the presence of his brothers who were instruments to him coming into Egypt. All those thoughts and all those memories would have resurfaced by then, and he would have had a chance to feel angry, resentful, vengeful against his brothers. But instead of taking revenge on his brothers, he said to his brothers that, the fact that you hated me and sold me into Egypt, God was behind it. Because God wanted me to come to Egypt and to be a father to Pharaoh so that I could save many millions of lives as I am doing today. He realized that his dreams were from God, but he didn't understand the process for those dreams to come true. He would have to go through such difficult years in his life. But when he saw it in the light of the purpose of God for his life, he was able to deal kindly with his brothers. So he told his brothers not to be afraid of him, and he told his brothers to go back to their dad and ask the dad to move the entire household into Egypt because there's going to be another 5 years of famine, and there would be no food for either for human or for animals. So it would be best for Jacob to come with his entire clan, with his entire family, along with his livestock and everything that he owned, and move into the best land in Egypt, into Goshen, where they could take down their roots there, they could build houses there, they could live there and prosper there, not just survive but prosper there. Pharaoh heard about Joseph's brothers' arrival and he was really pleased that they were there, so he told Joseph, tell your brothers to bring their father and to bring everybody here because I want to give them the best of the land. So Joseph's brothers back to Canaan land, taking the provision with them, taking extra animals and chariots with them to bring their father, to bring their daughters, their sons, and their children, and their families, and their cattle, and their livestock, and their servants, and everything they had to come down from the land of Canaan into Egypt and to dwell there so that Joseph can take care of them in the next year. So when Jacob found out that Joseph was still alive, at first he was shocked. Then he was very pleased and excited. He worshiped God, and God told him, Joseph will put his hand on your eyes. You are going to die there in a good old age. So Jacob goes along with his entire household down to Egypt. He meets with his son. They cry on each other's shoulders. Joseph takes Jacob and his brothers, some of his brothers, and presented them to Pharaoh. Pharaoh blessed them, gave them the land of Goshen to live in. They all settled down there. And now years later, Jacob dies. Now, when Jacob is dead and has been buried, the brothers thought that now that Jacob, the father, is out of the picture, Joseph is going to take revenge on us. So they made up a story saying that, before our father died, he had commanded us to seek forgiveness from you, and he said that you should forgive us. Now, none of that ever happened, but they made up the story. And I want to read this last chapter of the book of Genesis to help you see the heart of Joseph that he had toward his brothers who hated him so much. So, here in verse 15 it says, after the death of their father, Joseph's brothers said, what if Joseph still hates us and plans to pay us back for all the harm we did to him? So they sent a message to Joseph saying, before our father died, he told us to ask you, please forgive the crime your brothers committed when they wronged you. Now please forgive us the wrong we did. We are the servants of your father's God. Joseph cried when he received this message. Then his brothers themselves came and bowed before him. Here we are before you as your slaves, they said. But Joseph said to them, don't be afraid. I can't put myself in the place of God. You plotted evil against me, but God turned it into good in order to preserve the lives of many people who are alive today because of what happened. You have nothing to fear. I will take care of you and your children. So he assured them with kind words that touched their hearts. Isn't that amazing? I'm looking at this story and I wonder, where did Joseph learn such kindness and learn forgiveness from? The story of Joseph happened before Moses, so obviously Joseph didn't have any Bible to read. Christ had not come yet because the story occurred thousands of years before Jesus came and died on the cross and showed us what God's forgiveness was like. It was all before that. But Joseph had this knowledge of God, that God was kind and forgiving, and that he was behind all the events in his life. And he engineered circumstances, albeit not perfect. And he used the brothers' hatred against Joseph to bring Joseph into his destiny and into his high calling that Joseph had. Joseph realized all that and he comforted his brothers and says, "Don't be afraid. You plotted evil against me, but God turned it into good in order to preserve the lives of many people who are alive today because of what happened. You have nothing to fear. I will take care of you and your children." And with these words, he comforted them. I would like to encourage you with the story. If bad things have happened in your life, if you trust in God, you can be assured that your story will also be similar to that of Joseph, in the sense that God will use people who don't like you, don't love you, don't value you, probably despise you, slander you, hurt you, harm you, and do you all kinds of bad things. Probably even returning evil for the good you have done. Despicable people. God will use such people to propel you into your destiny if you learn to have a heart of Joseph. And to have a heart of Joseph, you need to be able to look beyond the hurts and the woundings that have happened to you in the past. Look at the call that God has put on your life. Just as Joseph needed his brothers to propel him into his destiny, even Jesus needed Judas to propel him into his destiny. We all need people like that in our lives to propel us into our destiny. And if we start to see things from this redemptive perspective of God using people to propel us into our destiny, even bad people to propel us into our destiny, then we can thank God for them instead of wishing evil to them, cursing them, plotting against them, trying to take revenge on them. People who have hurt us badly, however bad it is, if we can have the redemptive perspective to look at those people and circumstances as something that God could use and has used to propel us into our destiny, however bad it is. God causes all things to work together for good to those who love Him and who are called according to His purposes. So God will use the good, the bad, and the ugly in your life to bring about His design and the destiny and the purpose, the high calling that He has for your life into fruition. But it depends on how you react to those bad circumstances and people in your life. If you can learn to love them and take care of them like Joseph did, it would move you faster into your place of calling and destiny. But if you're unable to forgive and you're vengeful and you're hurtful and you practice tit for tat and you are seeking to pull them down and hurt them in return, then you're going to delay your destiny and calling. You will be losing time because of your vengeful attitude. It takes bad circumstances and bad people to work out the character of God in each one of us. And we need to have the heart of Joseph, not only to forgive, but also to do good. And Joseph went the second mile. He not only forgave his brothers, but he also took care of them and their children. So I would like to encourage you with the story of Joseph to do as he did so that you will be propelled into your destiny. God bless you.